Before we start this week's episode of the podcast, we just wanted to let you know that we'll be releasing a review of the Master Chief Collection later this week. Look forward to it.
Greetings and welcome to episode number 12 of You Had Me at Halo, where we talk about everything past, present, and future of one of gaming's most storied franchises. For this week, we have a large Sandbox update from 343. We're also going to touch on some other smaller news items of the week, such as Staten's new position, the paywall going down completely for Halo multiplayer, and then an update on the game engine. First, let's meet today's Spartan team. Joining me today is Spartan Mike, a.k.a. Kage Maru. How's it going, Mike?
Hey, everyone. How you guys doing?
Good. And next we got Spartan Ursel, a.k.a. Soul Blazer. How's it going?
Hey, going pretty well. Feels weird to be back with only 5 again. See what happens next week.
Yeah, but we do got Mike, and so we did need to make a spot for him.
I'm talking up for 2 people.
Yeah. Just kidding, sort of. Next up, we have Spartan Jesse, a.k.a. Don Cabeza. How's it going, Jesse?
I am doing well. How are you?
Super. And get a cup of coffee before we get going. Next up, we have one of our newer returning members, Spartan Daniel, a.k.a. Nadian. How's it going, man?
Pretty good, guys. How's everybody doing?
Good.
We're all doing well.
Glad you can make it back from the move. And then
it's been a rough weekend.
Well, hopefully we can have a little bit of fun, take a break here, and talk a little bit about some Halo. Just as a side note, Mr. Proven can't make it in today. Austin's got tied up last second, so I do have some of his thoughts about a couple things. But to kick it off, let's just kind of get out of the way some of the smaller news items. And one of the things that was an update since we last met was regarding the game engine. And if any of you were here for our show a few weeks ago when we did our predictions, we know that there was a couple predictions that the Xbox One version would get canceled. And I think we do have some information that may lead us to having an answer on that already. Don, I know you had some of that information available in front of you. Do you want to go ahead and take that one away?
Yeah, in the blog post, they were saying, here's something that excites me as an engineer architect. I believe this was... For Halo Infinite, we rebuilt the engine multi-threading solution to ensure high execution, blah, 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 across PC, instead of running optimally just on Xbox One. Then it goes through a little more about how they're doing parallel multi-threading and whatnot to ensure high graphic efficiency on PC CPUs, Xbox Series X and S, and Xbox One X and S. As in, this game is still announced and being worked on and is going to come out on Xbox One. I'm sorry, Nick.
So OBM 1, Nick 0, I think. So you unfortunately got pulled into that one. So.
I mean, there's no evidence. I was clearly on Team Xbox One the whole time.
So anybody have any thoughts on that? I mean, for me personally, I think, like we said on that show, it seemed like a no-brainer that unless there was something really broken or cyberpunk-ish about the Halo 1, the Xbox One version it was releasing. So not a real big surprise to me. Anybody have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think there was ever... For anyone who didn't really just want it to be the truth, there was never any evidence that it would happen. And the fact that, unlike CD Projekt Red, you can assume that of the many extra studios that are helping with Halo Infinite, that one of them is probably mainly focused on the Xbox One version. They've done it before, having different teams work like on Forza Horizon 2 for the 360, while the main studio did the Xbox One version. They're big enough, they've got enough money, and they're generally well set up enough that there's no reason to assume that it's going to be cyberpunky at all.
Right. Yeah, I think I'd have to agree on that. I do know there was some rumors for a little bit that came out, and I don't know if there was ever any credibility that somebody did mention the possibility of it getting delayed beyond 2021, and they were even considering the Xbox One version, but never said it was canceled, just said it was consideration. I'm sure everything's always a consideration, but yeah, it just never seemed very likely. So
Yeah, and I think I made the point on episode 10 that 343 has a lot more expertise with optimizing their engine for their targeted platforms than CDPR does.
Yeah.
right.
And obviously that's kind of the point of that whole spiel. And I think the only potential reason I could have seen it happening before was because of Forge. But if they've been able to optimize memory usage as well, then that's a non-issue as well.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean,
All right.
CD Projekt Red also shoots for PC and works their way down, whereas this thing was an Xbox One game day one,
Yeah.
and built like that. I do think because of the CPU info that we got here, we're probably going to be seeing an even bigger gap between last gen and current gen
Yeah.
than what's
Agreed.
initially.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, especially if they're going to shoot for 30. Or no, shooting for 30 would actually help last gen, but still with the additional threads and all that, the render.
And it's going to be the end of the year, so you can assume the tool set, which becomes a bit of a meme for people, but it's true. The tool set is going to be way more mature by the time this game comes out, which only widens that gap, as you said.
Yeah. So it's I think that alone is a clear sign that it's going to be a marked improvement over what we saw last year.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt.
Yep. All right, cool. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it, and we did talk a lot about it on episode 10. So now we know who's right.
Technically, the game hasn't released yet. All right.
You can hold out. You can hold out the hope. You hold out that hope. I'll keep holding out hope that.
Listen, if there's even a single part of the game that's not on the Xbox One, I consider that a win for myself.
I was going to say, what happens if they do like a hybrid approach where something like Forge is online only because it runs off the cloud? And, like, who wins then?
I still do.
I
All
do.
right, we're going to move on.
It's still on Xbox One.
All right, we're going to move on to because we have so many topics this week. I think we're going to try to fly through some of these that we can. We do have a little bit of news on Staten's new position, and this wasn't necessarily something that was really high on my radar, but I know that just listening to other podcasts and the community, there have been speculation what this means, and Mike, I know you talk to some developers and things like that sometimes. I mean, what were your thoughts on this role, what that could mean, and is it a trend that we should be looking out for, or did his position change much? Is it that different than what it was a couple weeks ago?
I don't think so. And that's the thing. Like, I've seen some comments on the internet where people think that means that he's sticking with 343 for the long haul, and he's now a lifer with the studio or something along those lines, where they could have just made, I mean, he could just be mapping out in a general way or a more specific way of, their 10-year plan, because obviously I think things to some extent have changed since they originally announced it. And, I don't know. I don't think much has really changed other than them putting a more specific title to what his role really is.
Yeah. One of the things that jump out to me is the fact that they are getting so specific with this title. Does that make him more of a mainstay with the studio? And I think that's the first thing that popped in my head is like, hey, this guy, it sounds like maybe he's on board for the long haul. Anybody else had similar thoughts about that or disagreed? Is that not really?
Well, when they announced it, it was announced, to help finish everything. And that has been his MO, is either it's a project he's on from the beginning, something like Tell Me Why, or it's something like,
Crackdown,
where he's coming in to help finish off a project. They said coming in to help finish it off at the beginning. So I still don't think there's any reason to think it's more than that. And this is meant to be a long project. So being the head of creative, it's not just the campaign proper to worry about. There's what is happening after launch and getting all that in a good place before you go.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, like him helping with the roadmap, stuff like that. It's there's no point in him making sure that it launches on the right foot. If he's gonna peace out and he's like, all right, you guys are on your own. I'm not gonna help. My help here is done.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that jumps in my head, though. So, like what you're saying there, you're saying it doesn't really change anything. But initially when I heard the news, I thought maybe he's just here to help him land this launch, and then move on to other things. But to me, it sounds like at least he's going to be more integrated in the long-term roadmap, which at a very minimum, which to me makes me feel more confident, because I have me personally, I have had questions about their creative leadership and being able to kind of funnel everybody into a singular vision in the past, and just hearing some of the comments from previous leads who left the studio. That's kind of where that impression came up. So this does make me feel far more confident creatively about the long-term trajectory of Halo Infinite. Sol or Daniel, do either one of you guys got any further thoughts on it?
Yeah, I was going to say that it seems more like a transient state, in that he's probably not a permanent employee, but at 343, I mean, that's kind of his bag is jumping from one project to another. But I think it's going to be more than just helping get the ship righted. I think at this point, kind of like what Mike was saying, I think he's going to paint the broad strokes. He may be there for a year or 2 or 3, but I don't think he's going to be, it's kind of the subcontractor position we kind of talked about before. And obviously Staten's in a different state because of his prestige and, position in Microsoft. But I think that he's going to be there for more than just what the role seemed like when he was brought back on.
Yeah,
about the same thoughts here, to be honest. I do think he's gonna, at least from what he made it seem like the role would be when he discussed it on the Discord. I feel like he might be planning out some things, even some things way farther in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty exciting to me, because he's generally shown that he knows what to do with the story, with the game, with the themes, etc.
Yeah, I think where I'm at, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that he's long term, because, like I've said before, I think that has been one of 343's challenges. So maybe it's just more of a hopeful thing that he's here more than it is evidence that he definitely is. Does anybody think he might end up going up any higher up the ladder? Like, I've seen some speculation on the internet.
I kind of hope not.
343 or
yeah, 343.
Oh,
Anybody see him taking the head of 343 altogether, or just or not?
Go ahead, Mike.
No, I kind of agree. I kind of hope not, but
yeah,
I guess that depends on how necessary that is,
and how much he enjoys his current role. I feel like if he comes back to Halo and he really likes it, and he missed it or whatever, and then he wants to, then I could see it happening.
Yeah.
I mean, my experience, creatives and or technicals don't necessarily like. I mean, I'm a technical guy. I don't particularly want to be in leadership. Most of my team doesn't. Most creatives that I've worked with throughout my life don't either. And maybe I'm reading too much into Staten's history, but it seems like that would be the opposite of what he wants to do, because his bag and his gold is in writing and creativity.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, he's been kind of a fixer, right? Or not, or a finisher. Maybe fixer isn't the right term, but a finisher. Closer. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So, I mean,
well,
I imagine
he's a starter too, but his most of those projects get ripped out, like Destiny.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm talking strictly within Microsoft or Xbox Game Studios.
Oh, yeah.
He's been. So I mean, I wonder if that's something that he actually enjoys. Like the problem solving, the challenges, the variety, especially after being stuck with 2 different franchises over the last 2 decades or almost.
Yeah.
Well, ReCore was his baby from the get-go, wasn't it?
Was it? I know he had something to do with the story aspects of it, but they didn't really. I don't know that they ever really clarified how big of a role. But Daniel, you brought up a really really good point because somebody kind of works in a technical field as well. Um, the advantages of being in leadership is having more creative say sometimes. But when you get to a certain point, then you actually step away from that, and you just become like this liaison or this. You got to make sure everybody's kind of running in the same direction and things like that.
Right.
But you actually, the higher up you go, the less. I guess for me, it's actually the less fun. I really kind of question whether I want to get too much further away from the action than where I'm at, just personally speaking. And it sounds like somebody like Staten, you would think that at this point in his career, if he really really wanted to be a studio lead, he probably could have had that job somewhere by now.
Oh
you know?
yeah,
Definitely.
So so I think I kind of like him where he's at. I just hope he stays there long. But any other final thoughts on that before we go to the next thing? No. All right. Let's go on to I guess the news of the week that we kind of missed. It wasn't really Halo news, but there was a fiasco that lasted about 10 hours that we know they doubled the price of gold. The good news, though, if you want to just kind of focus on that, is when they reverse course, it forced them to announce the fact that free to play is going to be going free, and they may have had that in the pipeline already, but they're kind of forced to throw that out there. So now we don't have to speculate anymore. We know that when Halo Infinite releases at the end of the year, that everybody who's got an Xbox, who's obviously everybody's got a PC that can run it, can jump on with less barriers to play the multiplayer. And so for me, it got me thinking about that because I do wonder if we tend to maybe underrate what that could mean for the, for the quality, the innovation, some of the ideas they come up with when you start to get a gigantic base. We know that with like Halo 5, the base, it was sticky, like the base that stuck really stuck, but we know that it's not at the scale that Halo 3 was in terms of like the mainstream appeal. And so I did want to bring this topic to all you guys to talk about that. And I'm actually going to tie it. I'm going to read a couple things that I saw from the update that came out regarding the Sandbox, and they did talk a little bit about feedback. And so I want to just kind of tie this in and then kind of move around the panel. It said, we respect Halo's legacy by partnering with our players with the same honesty and integrity we use to craft our gameplay. This means that we acknowledge that we have a 20-year franchise and recognize players all around the world have different preferences, likes, dislikes, etc. And we commit to making sure we're mindful of past precedences and core experiences while making sure we're considering feedback from all players, not just campaign players or just CE purists, i.e. me. And we strive to honor Halo's rich 20-year history. As the free-to-play multiplayer shifts to a true service, it's more critical than ever that we drive continued feedback loops to ensure we're prioritizing the right work and continually improving the experience. Player feedback via community input and additional vectors like user research studies serves as a North Star that will evaluate alongside game telemetry data and our team's instincts to inform a specific income. So he says all that stuff basically to say that, this is going to be an ongoing thing to kind of keep molding and doing different things with Halo. But let me go ahead and I'll start off with Daniel and kind of get some of your thoughts on that, and then we'll kind of go around the panel a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. Tons of insiders that I follow all basically said, hey, this was kind of a planned move. I mean, obviously the price increase was so disconnected from reality. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of tons of people just being jobless and having a hard time making it. So I thought that was ridiculous. But how they, backtrack, that's the important thing. They backtrack, they listen to feedback, and then they were dropping the good news of free to play is now free to play. And I think that's going to be it's going to be interesting because I think it provides a platform that Halo has never really had, in the sense that it's going to be on PC, Xbox One, and Series S and X, and now it's also going to be free to play. So you're going to have a huge number of people that in the scale of Apex numbers or something like that, hopefully. And so it'll be interesting to see how they balance the feedback from all the new players and players like us, and purists like you, Abe. So it'll be interesting. I think it's good, and I think that it's clear that they know that they're going. I mean, they talk about in the blog that they've got a team that they're building up specifically for versioning and feedback response and things like that. So I think they know kind of what it's going to entail. I hope that they'll be up to the task, because, like I said, I think it's going to hit them on a scale that they haven't seen before.
Yeah, if they thought that they it was tough being a Halo developer before, imagine when you start to get a bunch more screaming voices in there.
Exactly.
No, that was some really good points, Daniel. Jesse, let me kind of turn over to you and get some thoughts from you. I know you kind of had thoughts about maybe the business models and things like that, and what that could mean with all this. But what just generally, like what's kind of your thoughts on Halo going true free to play, and then some of the other comments regarding the feedback and all that.
Yeah, I mean there is no negative about it as far as being someone who plays. It's only a positive to not have to spend money if you don't want to. With their newest numbers, it's pretty obvious quite a few people are on Game Pass, and quite a few people use Xbox Live. But still, on the whole, having that open, having it on PC especially, and having it open where it's always free, they can't force it, which is why the whole system's so weird. It's great. It is a positive, but the main thing I took out of it is that the Master Chief Collection is still, and I don't think we'll cover it because it wasn't anything huge, but like they're adding content to the game. They've got that free pass system where you can jump between tiers and games to unlock things in the order you want for each tier. And I think that system is going to be a basis for what they end up doing with Infinite's monetization. Because obviously, as a free-to-play, no online live required on console game, they make the money up elsewhere. They're going to be real sensitive about doing it in a way that angers people. And the system in the Master Chief Collections, you can't actually pay anything for it. It's just playing. I think it is the basis for what Infinite will do, and hopefully, and I don't have any reason to doubt it, I think they'll figure out something fair, because they're real sensitive about pissing people off.
Right. Well, we know that at least the gaming overall is pretty sensitive to pissing people off. So it's the fastest I've ever seen a mega corporation.
Yeah, that was insane how quick that turned.
A nearly $2 trillion corporation got bullied into changing their mind in the same day. So.
Can we at least appreciate the fact that they did? I mean, there's plenty of times where, Nick mentioned it on the last XboxEra podcast, where another company may do something that is arguably worse, and they stick to it. So it's 100%. Nice at least that they.
And this wasn't no PR attempt. They had the cards physically printed. This was for whatever reason they were going through
ridiculous.
with this.
It's been really, really dumb.
I think it's pretty obvious this was always tied to Halo, because the year-long cards disappeared last summer. Halo was supposed to be coming out in November, and free-to-play going free would have been the thing to offset them. And it's like, oh, they're so greedy, they just need this money. It's like, no, it's more they just want to make Xbox Live a bad deal, so you go to Game Pass as a great deal.
Exactly.
It's a manipulative.
100%. 100%.
It absolutely was. It was just dumb.
It does feel like it was something set in motion a while ago, though. That was just following the schedule.
But I'll say, what else was dumb? Bundling Connect, and it took them 6 months to
the moment Phil took over.
Well, that was in large part because of just how tied to the system architecture Connect was.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
I like Connect.
You know.
You know, just because it's a, you know, like I think we both people agree it was not a wise move.
No,
I
it's not a
definitely,
wise move at all. But for a while,
No,
I
it should have
felt
been separate.
for
I
a
thought
while,
it
I
was-
was living in the future. Okay, and that was amazing.
so, all right, cool. Sol or Mike, do you
Yeah,
want
I
anything
want
else?
to say something really quick about the free to play thing. I don't think people realize how big of a barrier it was.
Yeah.
Maybe not as much these days, but I remember back in the day, I didn't play a single Halo game online, minus a few trials here and there, because when I was a kid, my parents saw a subscription and they're like, "Whoa, no, thank you."
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So now you fast forward to today, you opened your audience up by tens of millions of people, if not more. Right? If the Xbox One has 55, 60 million, whatever the heck it is, and there's what, 20, 25 million Xbox Live subscribers, that's almost double now. That
Mhm.
these people can play this game now without any kind of anything else. They already have all the tools needed, and that's a really big deal, in my opinion.
Yeah, especially when you consider last gen, 2 out of 3 gamers had both systems.
Yeah,
So that means that, you know, if you're trying to save some money, you're going to play you're going to play Fortnite on the system you don't have to pay extra to play it on.
100%.
Yeah, this is
And-
huge for Series S too. You know, think
Yeah,
about
yeah.
$300 entry point, cheaper than any other next gen system, and you've got access to Halo.
Yep.
Yep.
I wasn't. I always found it troubling to suggest the Xbox One S or even the Series S to people who just wanted like a Fortnite box, because I'm like, yeah, but there's also the subscription you got to buy, right? I'm like,
Right.
in my head, I'd be like, get Game Pass. But if you're not interested in Game Pass, then don't get an Xbox. You know?
Right. Well, yeah, no, I think you guys you hit some great points, and I you know, the other thing too, and I know it's not really tied into too much of today's topics, but even the campaign, you know, thinking about elaborating on that, the current trajectory, like if they stayed on pace, and we don't know, you know, how the year is going to go, but if they stayed on pace, they're well on pace to be like 30 million, you know, Game Pass subscribers by then. So you start thinking about that, and it's like, okay, you got 30 million people that could potentially just access it just by downloading it over PC and console. You know, that really does change, I think, the just the trajectory, like the support and everything else, and just the amount of options. So like when I see this stuff, the main thing that kind of came into my head is, you know, in the past there was always this like anxiety over how the game was going to launch and what kind of balancing they're going to have, and you know, if you didn't like it, then well, you got to wait 3 more years before there's maybe another shot that you'll like Halo multiplayer again or whatever. You know, but when you think about this, is if you get a base big enough, there's really, and you have this ongoing support, and it's continuing to drive people to the ecosystem. And you think about like a Fortnite or an Apex and how they just continuously get these massive updates. There's almost no reason why you can't have something for everybody. Like you could have a playlist that is highly competitive, and maybe it is more geared towards the classic fans. And then you have stuff they are going to have, and this is maybe being negative for some of us older gamers. They are going to have a much younger audience come in because of this. You know, you got to think about, so think about but you're going to have you're going to have a fresh audience, right? People that don't have that, they're not tied to the franchise. And so they can experiment and maybe find some things that a whole nother audience adapts to.
And 343 have done the work for this franchise, for this new fan base too, right? They've got rid of the numbers. They've made the game seem like a soft reboot. I mean, the direct comparison in my mind is Gears 5, which is a solid game. The arcade mode was there as like a entry for new people. Point. Exactly, but at the same time, Gears does not have the player base and the appeal that a game like Halo does. I don't think it ever did. I don't think it ever will.
It can't. I think at the end of, it's one of those games that if by now you don't know how to play it, you're still screwed.
Yeah. Well, Infinite, I mean, it's still a first-person shooter. People know what that is. People are used to it. So they'll jump in, right? They'll give it a shot. Why not?
Yep. No, I agree. Any other thoughts, Mike? I know I kind of glanced over you. Did you have anything else? You're good. Okay, cool.
One last thing, sorry, I wanted to mention was, you know, technically thinking about it, with the free-to-play requirement gone, now in a sense, there's a little more pressure on the campaign.
Yeah,
because it needs to be even better than it was, or it needs to be really good regardless now, because Game Pass subs are now reliant only on the campaign.
Yep. No, yeah, absolutely agree with all that. All right, so I know we got a lot of stuff to cover today. So we
Oh,
had
yeah.
this whole Sandbox update. So let's see, we covered, I think, the side news items, right? We got those good? So let's move on to everything else they talked about regarding the Sandbox and everything there. So for people in our audience that maybe don't know what they mean by Sandbox. And I think if you've been part of Halo for a long time, you probably do, but just in case. Based on the definition from the developers, they said the game Sandbox refers to all the vehicles, equipment, weapons, and objects that the player will interact with. Essentially, all the toys that the player gets to play with. The Sandbox also includes all the player systems and verbs like jump, run, health values, shield recharge times, etc. The work involved with creating these are both equal parts fun and challenging due to the sheer size and expectations of a Halo game. The Sandbox team's responsibility is to craft these toys and shepherd them through the complete development cycle from concept to polish and ultimately ship. We create weapons, vehicles, player mechanics, and systems that are intuitive and reward player mastery. We feel strongly that everything we create has to be easy to pick up and understand. And once we have something that is simple to understand, we push for depth that the players can appreciate and display in game through experience and mastery. We know something is Halo ready when we have achieved these two requirements. So I think just to kind of like snapshot that last section, that's what he talks about: easy to pick up, hard to master, that skill gap. So he talks about that. So that's kind of what we're talking about with the Sandbox. Now, as we kind of like delve into that, as they kind of address certain aspects of it, and this is where I think we'll kick it back over to the panel. He does talk about the Halo Doctrine. The Halo Combat Doctrine is a document that establishes core Halo combat philosophy. It outlines our principles of what must be a true Halo in playing the Sandbox, and specifically the moment-to-moment combat. The primary purpose of these principles is to shape design discussions regarding foundational Halo combat in both campaign and multiplayer experiences. So I think the way we could refer to that is like the Halo Bible, and I think there was that in the past with the Bungie Halos. I'm not sure if there was so much with the 343 ones. Mike, I guess I'll turn it over to you. Kind of, would you have any thoughts on that aspect of it?
I mean, you kind of nailed it when it came to the whole Halo Bible thing, because I don't remember anything even close being resemble that 343 until now. And honestly, the combat doctrine, I like the name, and considering how in different aspects they were removed from the holy trinity of the gameplay in Halo 4 and Halo 5, like it, just this direction alone is reassuring to me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my initial response, is that, I like that. As a longtime Halo fan, that's good. Let's go with that direction.
Yeah. So how about you, man? I agree with what you're saying, Mike. I think we're all on the same page. You got kind of like additional thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I say additional. I mean, I could go into the details of the various topics they had, the dance, the tools of engagement, etc. But for the most part, it all sounds good. Like it's, of course, I have to wait and see until I have the game in my hands or I see more of it. But so far, it sounds like they get what Halo is. And they have a clear vision, and I think this is the more important part: is they know what they want Halo to be. You know what I mean? And they're doing this to do so. But one thing I wanted to mention was the interview or the blog post had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people being interviewed, and when you looked into when they joined 343, it's a lot of them are kind of recent, like in between 2015 to 2020. So a lot of these people are pretty fresh to the franchise, which I think is a good thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Get people out of the drugs that Halo 4 and 5 might have left 343 in, That's
a really, really good point. And it's something I've mentioned this to other people before. I don't know that I said this on the show, but when people say, a lot of times you hear somebody say, well, 343's never done this or that. And yeah, Bonnie Ross still runs the studio, but she's not the creative. She doesn't really get involved in the creative process. Their creatives are completely different, from what they had in 4 and 5. And it does look like not only are they coming into this, without necessarily being the ones who led the charge on some of the other decisions, but they're also people that seem to get it. And like, I read these things and I think, for most people, it's like, okay, well, that doesn't sound like news, but really, if you are a Halo enthusiast, like that is the core thing. And that's the core thing that exactly. I think a lot of people thought they didn't get before. But Daniel, I didn't ask you if you had any thoughts on that initially. I know we're going to go down some and talk about some other aspects of this, but anything you wanted to kind of say to just those first few points?
I mean, pretty much what everybody else said, but I think, I don't know that they never had a combat Bible before or a Halo Bible before. I just don't think I think they were still trying to figure it out, because 4 and 5 are so fundamentally different, both in weapon handling and this. I mean, just the sandbox entirely is completely different. And like you said, there was a lot of departures. I mean, I still remember Corinne Yu was one of the reasons that the lighting engine was so incredible in 4. And you look at a lot of the people from 4, they weren't there for 5, and a lot of them quite a few of the ones from 5 aren't going to be there for Infinite. So I'm hopeful that, like you said, the new blood will help kind of reinvigorate things. And I think, one of the major points that they talk about was the reduction of redundancy. So I think that's going to help with a lot of the complaints that you hear from Proven and me sometimes too, and plenty of others, that sometimes some of the weapons were just too similar. The BR, the light rifle, the DMR, they all shared a lot of the carbine. They all shared a lot of the same roles. I mean, that's that's for any of FPS is going to do that. But I think Halo, because of its its sci-fi nature, because of its alien and Forerunner and human race, diversions, I think there's a lot more opportunity to do something different than just making another rifle class, right?
Yeah.
So I think the fact that they directly mention things like that is a wonderful sign for me. I think it's all good.
Really good points. And actually, speaking of Proven, and since we're kind of touching on that aspect, he did have a comment on that, so I'm just going to read that since he's not here. He said this was a great news for him personally. He said he thought Halo 5 had too many weapons that played the same role. The pistol, DMR, light rifle, carbine were all essentially the same with minor tweaks. I think, I would absolutely agree with that. There should be at most 2 weapons that do similar things. Halo needs more variety other than weapons that all feel slightly different. That's a really, really huge point. And another one that, again, could easily be glanced over. But, one of the reasons why I am such a Halo CE fan is everything, like in their game, like every single weapon was so distinct. Like there was no really like overlap.
Yeah.
So it had less weapons, but everything meant more. You know what I'm saying? Like it actually had more of a purpose. So, I mean, so you were just speaking up. What were you going to say?
I mean, I was just agreeing with you. Though I feel like this is a problem, or not a problem. This is something that will start off strong. You know what I mean? When Halo Infinite releases, they'll have their unique weapon types, their less overlap, etc. But I feel this is something very easy to come up as the game progresses, as more and more content releases months and months. Like, hey, here's another version of a similar weapon we already have. It's just slightly different, and I hope that doesn't happen, because you're right. I'm with you here too. I really like having unique weapons. That is definitely one of my favorite parts of CE. But I feel like we'll have to wait and see. Is how I feel about it.
I mean, what how they like to look back to shaping Infinite in the future. I mean, one of the things that like what OBM said about how Halo 1 had distinct weapons, even weapons that kind of had overlap. The plasma rifle and the assault rifle, there is overlap there, but there were distinct traits. The different plasma rifle slowed you down. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
The different damage types. One, again, there's the classic shield versus, kinetic. But they if they can make it so that not only do they have different attributes, But I think one of the key things that has been lost in the Halo sandbox is contextual awareness, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because, you know, in the classic Halos, you knew what a needler sounded like. You knew what the projectiles looked like. You didn't have to actually see the person holding the gun. They can be in the next room, and you know exactly what you're in for if you enter that room. And that has definitely been lost to an extent with Halo 4 and Halo 5, I think.
You know, even like Halo 2 and Halo 3 to an extent, you have the Covenant sniper rifle, but it's still significantly different, you know, from the human one.
Yeah. I mean, I think Bungie did an amazing job keeping that distinction and awareness all throughout Halo. It didn't matter all the way up to Halo Reach.
Yeah.
I mean, you knew the difference between a DMR and a needle rifle, you know?
Yeah.
So, and it's especially when they introduced the Promethean weapons, I think a lot of that was lost because it was all yellow and it all had a synthesized type alien sound to it. That the biggest difference was the rate of fire instead of the actual sound, the actual projectile look, you know?
Yeah. No, those are excellent points, especially about the Promethean. I think it added. It was almost like subtraction by addition.
Yeah.
Jesse, how about you, man? You've been a little bit quiet.
Yeah, one of the things I liked in the original iteration of 4's multiplayer obviously wasn't good, and they really worked hard to fix it. But those Promethean weapons and whatnot, they did feel different. Like the light rifle was either really quick hip fire, or it was a big, heavy down the sight shot. And then they lost that in 5, really trying to get that level of balance for esports.
Mhm.
So, yeah, and I think it will be pretty diverse because I still think Halo Infinite's going to end up being an all-encompassing Halo game. So every weapon, or the Banished have a lot of really cool stuff. Their big thing is like a mix of Covenant and Prometheus or Forerunner technology. So I'm interested to see what type of weapons they have, what type of vehicles they have, because I think there's a good chance that the new brute stuff that's introduced is sort of married to what the Promethean weapons were if they end up working together. And that could be really interesting to see, like the disintegration-y, plasma-y stuff where they talk about damage types and that being a thing we'll get into later. I do wonder, is it going to be a new damage type? That could be really interesting.
Yeah.
More area of effect stuff outside of rocket launchers they were talking about. Having this variety of ways that you can control a fight instead of it just being I hit you in the head the most is exciting.
Well, they even talked about some weapons that take advantage of physics, which that got me kind of excited as well.
Hasn't really been anything like that since the grenade launcher, really.
Yeah.
So it'll be real interesting to see.
Again, yeah, that's like it's like that dynamic aspect, and we didn't have it really as a topic, but I guess it ties in to all of the stuff that we just talked about. You know, not just for the multiplayer, but for the campaign as well. You know, I recently, you know, I mentioned previously that I recently went through all the Halos again in order of story, but. One of the things that kind of jumped out to me as I moved on to the 343 campaigns was just how straightforward they were, I guess, you know, compared to some of the other ones. And it became, I don't know, more, it kind of hit me upside the head a little bit harder when you're doing everything back to back to back. Whereas, you know, with the Bungie Halos, there was just more like dynamic situations and things like that. And, you know, just like, you used to see like those old videos where people would just do crazy things in the game, even in the campaign, you know, using the rocket launcher in a vehicle or something, you know, to just pull off something that the game was never intended to do. And I just it's that replayability that really set Halo apart from you know, most campaigns back at those times. Anybody have
Sorry, I feel like that relates a little bit to the lone wolf part of the combat doctrine. because
Yeah,
I feel
yeah.
that's something the 343 Halos have been kind of lacking, which I'm really excited to see it here because that's a huge part for me. Halo 5, I like Halo 5. I think it's one of the most fun games I've played with friends, but when I played it alone, it wasn't good. Like, well, I didn't have that much fun with it, you know?
The
And
AI just can't keep up.
yeah, and that kind of sucked for me because Halo has always been that game where it's super fun with friends, but it's also really fun even on your own, you know?
Yeah, it's that mixture of, the linear areas, and then it throws you into this massive sandbox
Yeah.
that, like Sword Base and Reach, for example. You've got the two different directions. I mean, it seems really simple, but if you go left right after you come out of the Sword Base and the wraiths are coming up, it's a completely different mission
Yeah.
in terms of the order of your sub objectives and
Yep.
how the flow plays versus if you go right. And there's just none of those moments in 4 or 5. As much as I love 4's campaign, like you guys said, they definitely kind of stepped away from kind of the beauty of the Halo campaign.
And that's the stuff, again, like this stuff gets overlooked because I know everybody likes to focus on, well, Craig didn't have his face makeup on, during the July demo and things like that. But, that's never been what, where the drop off was. And I get the graphics still matter, but it's these things, like these core elements, and Daniel, what you were saying there, it's like the classic Halos, when you play those, especially if you like challenge yourself, like whatever that level is, whether it's heroic or legendary, or your skills diminish like Mike and you got to turn it on normal to be challenged. I'm kidding. But whatever that challenge is, it's like it's not just being good at aiming or having those quick twitches. It was almost like a puzzle. It's like, all right, first I'm going to go to that guy and I'm going to take his needler, and then I'm going to take out that pile of whatever there, and then I'm going to grab that plasma rifle so I can take that vehicle down. And
you mean almost like a dance?
Yeah. but yeah, it ties into that stuff perfectly. And so when they say that stuff, I don't know, like that necessarily clicks with everybody, but you don't like, I think for the layman that's even having fun, you don't necessarily always, you're not able to articulate that or kind of understand
like
why that is.
When you start an encounter and you die and you start the encounter again, it's very rare, if ever, that the encounter plays out the exact same way,
Even if you do the exact same thing.
Exactly. Even if you do the exact same thing, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, all these things to me, this is probably, I know this is going to be, one of the least sexy updates for a lot of casuals, but this is probably one of the most important stuff that as a long time Halo enthusiast that you want to make sure they get right. But I'll keep going down the list here. So yeah, you mentioned the lone wolf stuff. So you said, like, to abide by the lone wolf principle means that we must provide the player with the necessary items and features to empower them to be effective on their own. Teamwork will augment the experience, but we need to ensure that the player feels powerful on their own. One way that we achieve this is by looking at designing, tuning, and balancing the starting loadout for players in multiplayer. The basic traits, tools, and weapons must allow the player to be effective from the moment they spawn without the need to scavenge for good weapons. So Mike, I know this is like one of your areas, one of your hot buttons. What's kind of some of your thoughts about that statement?
I mean, it kind of just goes back to the classic, the classic, what do you call it? Sandbox. I don't want to say it doesn't matter what weapon you have, but even in multiplayer, depending on the skill levels and whatnot, you can have a lowly plasma pistol, and someone can have a rocket launcher. And yeah, they have the advantage as they should, but you still had a chance to win. You weren't completely, it wasn't guaranteed that you still had options. And that's that whole lone wolf section kind of just told me about how you always have options, and you really always should have options in a Halo game. I mean, that's what makes Halo's sandbox, whether it's multiplayer or campaign, infinitely playable. And so that's
no
what that's what now?
Said no pun intended. Keep going.
Oh yeah. So that's kind of what it tells me, where if you always have a chance, no matter what weapon you have, or you at least always have the option to handle it within any given circumstance, and some luck.
Yeah, and just to be fair, I do think that 343 did nail that with the Halo 5, at least for me, for the arena types, gameplay types. It's one of the reasons why I put 2,000 hours into that. And that was one of the things they did much, much better than Halo.
You mean
4.
the arena where you're always shooting at someone and then they dash behind a corner? Sorry, I'm just bringing Proven's arguments into the show. Every firefight always ends with somebody dashing behind a corner,
and that makes it unbalanced.
We got to leave him here. We got to make sure he's here to defend himself. But I mean, that is interesting because you are going to be getting rid of that aspect. But I do want, it is good to know that despite some of these other changes, that they're still going to hold on to that, because to be fair, that's not always been a Bungie thing. When Halo 2 came out, that was very frustrating to me, actually. I was not very happy with the balance when you start off with this. God, what was it? The assault rifle, one hand, and it's like
the SMG. It was SMG pistol start.
SMG,
what is this?
Yeah, it was. You basically were underpowered. It's like you basically were starting off like you were like in PUBG trying to grab a frying pan to take out somebody.
There's a reason Halo 2.
VR. Yeah. This is the mini VR.
There's a reason Halo 2 and MTC, for the most part, the serious game modes, you already start with the BR,
Yeah. Yeah, they eventually changed it, and got it right. But that is a good thing to just hear that they still have that understanding. Jesse or Daniel, any thoughts from you guys on that? Hello.
No, I think you guys hit everything.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to keep going down the list, and Jesse, is he on mute?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, cool. I didn't hear you say anything. So, all right, cool. So we're going to keep going down the list here. Now, one of the things they mentioned is that they did talk about the controls a little bit, and this is something that probably Halo 5 didn't do correctly. So I'll read off one of the comments from the developer. It said that Halo is best when the controls feel frictionless, natural, and responsive to the point that the controller or mouse and keyboard fades away and the player is just engaged to combat. Everything should feel intuitive, and we don't want the player to have to fight the game in order to have fun. It's because of this principle and the fact that Halo Infinite will be on PC that led us to rebuild the control scheme system to allow players to fully rebind and remap their controls regardless of platform. Now, Daniel, I know you had some thoughts on this, so I'll kick it off to you for the first thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack with this one, and it's fantastic news. I mean, for one, just touching base really quick, they talk about later on that you're going to feel like a Spartan and not just some random foot soldier. So for one, it tells me, okay, great. So, it's going to feel like I'm controlling a Spartan and not kind of like that floaty, slow tank of Halo 3.
Yeah. For
one. But two, I think it's pretty, I don't think it's, I don't think somebody could have a good faith argument and say that 343 has not done a good job of making some of the most fine-tunable controls, whether we're talking about 5, whether we're talking about MCC. I mean, those games are built for making the control, not just the buttons, but obviously the tuning of the axes to fit the person who's playing it. I mean, that's great for a lot of people, but it's also great for accessibility. Whether we're talking about people who are playing on PC with specific controllers that help with that, or the accessibility controller from Xbox. I mean, I think this is just going to pave the way to, again, allow more people to play. And, my wife, for example, will not play Halo 5 without an Elite controller because so many of the time with the standard controller, not having those paddles, just trying to, jump between dashing and still having the control to aim at the same time, it just becomes frustrating and she can't do it. And I know a lot of people are the same way because it does get in your way. And so having them immediately address that and say, hey, we're going to get the controls so that it's back to that intuitive kind of muscle memory aspect and get it out of the way so that you don't have those same issues. You don't have those same barriers for new players or for people who don't have an elite controller, for example.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a great thing overall. I think we're going to see people who may not have played because they felt like the controls were too sluggish. I think that this is going to allow them to tune it so that it's a little bit more responsive, whether it's on PC or Xbox. And I think that this is just building on the foundation that they kind of built with 5 and MCC in terms of those aspects.
No, you brought up some really good points, especially about the elite controller. And I know me personally, I had the elite one the day that Halo 5 came out, and I think the elite made Halo better, and Halo kind of made the elite more fun, and it was kind of they worked together. But for everybody else, it probably I don't even know. I'm trying to imagine it had to. That has to be kind of a pain. Anybody here on this panel play with a regular controller?
Yeah.
I do from time to time, yeah.
Okay. And how is that with Halo 5?
It's night and day.
Yeah, I don't do
I
no
It's not
fancy.
good with any FPS. It's
Because you have to let go the right analog stick every time you boost or do anything in that way.
Yeah.
So you're at a distinct disadvantage versus someone that can always keep their thumb on the right stick.
Yeah, I mean, it's why I play bumper jumper, right? So I could in the past jump or melee people while keeping my hand on the right stick. The problem with me is it's really tough to really get those moves down. The whole slide dash and then the super jumps, etc. in Halo 5. I know I practiced them a little, and I'm like, this is tough. Like, I don't think my hands are made for this.
well, you'll get arthritis and carpal tunnel and all that stuff.
Basically.
Do that without the.
Or you go back to my brother plays on the claw format, and heck no, I am not doing that.
Oh, that is guaranteed to give you some sort of surgery down the road. Jesse, I know you were trying to say something. So what were you about to say?
Pretty much any first-person shooter now, I can't not use something with back pedals.
Yeah.
Like Doom Eternal came out last year, and that game's like a 7 with a regular controller and an almost 10 with an elite, because it's so hard if you have to keep taking your finger off the thumbstick to go press buttons. And it ends up being the same thing for me with Halo, where any game where I have to constantly take my finger off the right stick, you're at a disadvantage. There's no getting around it.
I was saying thumb, but no, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But the thing is like the old Halos, I don't feel like they were that way. You could set up a control scheme with one of the defaults and keep your thumb on the stick all the time. And I think that's where they lost a lot of the casual players, was because you had to do so many things, and it felt like you had to really train yourself on that. But
it was just too frenetic sometimes.
Yeah. Anybody else have any other thoughts about that? The mapping aspect? Or I think we kind of covered all of that, but yeah. So I mean, to kind of summarize it, it's definitely going to be good, because it sounds like they are being cognizant of that. I think also giving more specific mapping is because Halo 5 didn't do that. They gave you some sets that you could choose from, but they didn't give you like the specific mapping that you could get in like Gears, for example.
Yeah.
And so and that's really important too, because I don't know about you guys, but I map my, like, even with the elite, I'll map things so that there's certain things that even on the paddles that I'm going to need to use quicker or need to be more twitchy with, and so you map certain moves that way, and then you move other things that you don't have to be as quick or twitchy on to other commands, and I think just for people to be able to map their play style, whether you're more of a guy who likes to sit behind and shoot people in the head, or you like to get up close and do damage that way, you're probably going to have different control schemes. And so I do think that's going to be good for the mainstream. And again, we talked about it earlier, that all these people you're bringing in with this free to play model, and a lot of new players, and making this as accessible as possible so that you can keep them in your player pool beyond the first few weeks. So now I did want to move down to the topic of the equipment. And I know, like, there was a lot of lot of thoughts on this one, so we might be here for just a little bit. But he said, I'll first read his comment and then turn it over to you guys. We prototyped equipment, we gravitated towards those that complemented and enhanced the core combat loop, pushing the boundaries just far enough to feel empowering without being disruptive. We looked for equipment that could be paired with maps, modes, weapons, and vehicles in new and effective ways. Another key aspect was equipment with a low skill floor and a high skill ceiling. In other words, the equipment that was easy to understand and benefit from for beginner players, but with elements of mastery that allow high skill players to do some amazing stuff. Again, kind of referring back to that skill gap. Another big part of equipment is that connection to a legacy element from Halo 3, something that players enjoyed and can understand, and upgrading that into a modern Halo experience. Now, Jesse, I know you had some thoughts on that, and then I'm also going to read off some stuff from Proven too, but I'll let you kind of start off with that one.
Yeah, it's going to be real interesting to see what are your base abilities, if any, and then how often do you get equipment. I imagine equipment will drop if you kill someone that hasn't used it yet, like in Halo 3. We've seen the drop shield. We saw one other one in one of their screenshots. I forget what it was. I don't know if it was, I think it was active cloak.
Grappling hook.
Well, there was the grappling hook, and then we saw the icon. But no, there was an icon in one of the screenshots they released, and I'm pretty sure it was cloak. So I would say drop shield, grapple shot, both we know. Cloak seems like a thing. How many will there be? There is zero chance they bring back armor lock, I hope. That would really piss people off.
They're
No way.
not
Yeah, so I'm really interested to see, is it going to be Halo 3-ish stuff brought back? Is it all mostly going to be new? What can you do yourself when you're running around? There was nothing from Halo 5 in that gameplay demo. There was no Spartan charge, ground pound, or boost. There was a little like hop to the side at the end of a run, like a little bit of a dash, but not assisted by jets. So I am real interested to see what are your movement abilities going to be, because pretty much every big first-person shooter now has a real emphasis on movement. You can't go back to what Halo was, and the Master Chief Collection is there for people that really want that. But anything modern, they're going to have a good base movement system, and then some fun, pretty powerful equipment items to make them really worth focusing on. Some more to balance. For some reason, Proven's thing was always, it was just too hard to balance when everyone had these cool moves, which is the opposite of the truth. If everyone always has it, you know how it's going to be, compared to having like, the drop shield just stupidly powerful. So, it just ends up breaking encounters type of thing. I think actually equipment pickups are harder to balance than always having something available. So I am real interested to see how that plays out.
What were you saying, Mike? You were jumping in there.
That was I think that was Daniel actually saying he agreed.
Was it Daniel? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm hearing things now. All right, yeah, Daniel, go ahead and elaborate. What were you about to say, man?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I agree with Jesse. Innate abilities, where everybody has them, is the definition of balance. Equipment, Halo 3's equipment, there were two items that people loved and everything else kind of sucked. So hopefully they can do a better job with this one. I'm skeptical because, again, that throws balance a little bit out the window if somebody's going to have something that's overpowered, that you have to, same thing with like Battlefront, the pickups, right? Anytime the Battlefront 1 versus 2, when there were pickups on the field, you always had the people who knew exactly where they were, and they ran there immediately, grabbed them, and then they were invincible for a while. Whereas Battlefront 2, they made them so they were earned items or earned abilities. And with Infinite kind of going back to the Halo 3 model, it'll be interesting. I'm hopeful because people have learned a lot since then, but by definition, equipment pickups are not going to be balanced compared to innate abilities.
No, I think it's right to be skeptical. I think Mike, you are one of those other ones that are skeptical on this, right?
Well, I mean, I think they just need to find the balance between not you. I mean, obviously the goal there is to disrupt the game momentarily for the better. To bring in some variety and maybe offer some additional options, but you don't want to have anything that's overpowered. But then at the same time, you don't want to put all this time developing these equipment that's going to ultimately be ignored. So, I mean, I see where they're getting at, but man, they are really making things a bit more difficult for themselves in terms of
balance.
Yeah, like in terms of balance. I mean, I think certain things like the grappling hook, invisibility, stuff like that. I mean, you have your staples, but it depending on how far out they get, because like the grappling hook, I can see how awesome that'd be for the campaign, but then how much is that going to break the multiplayer? Is that a permanent thing for the rest of the map, or is that a temporary thing that you have a set number of grapples?
Yeah.
Or hook shots or whatever you want to call it, or is it there for a time limit? There's a lot of questions I have when it comes to the multiplayer. When it comes to the campaign, that's neither here nor there. I do find it funny that they talked about the drop wall, or was it drop wall is what it's called?
Yeah, drop shield or whatever that. Yeah.
Yeah, but they talk about how it blocks the grenade. Otherwise, that would have been like a perilous encounter or situation for man. No, you sidestep. Like let's not try to oversell what this thing does, because unfortunately, the drop wall I think is going to be one of those things that is ultimately ignored, because it's going to be as useful or as sought after as the drop shield, not even the bubble shield, but not even the bubble shield, but the drop shield in Halo 3, because they had the bubble shield and the drop shield, and I think the bubble shield had a bit more
there's a lot of strategy around the bubble shield, whereas the drop shield, I mean, it was useless.
Well, I mean, it covers a pretty wide.
That one was really narrow. This one's way bigger.
So it covers a pretty wide area. So I feel like it'll be used as utility in certain parts, rushing towards another pickup or that kind of thing.
Another thing I have thought about, Forge mode and having like Fortnite Creative be a thing, having more physics-based stuff that people can make game modes out of for other people to play is going to be a big part of the equipment system. Like the grapple shot being a physical, physics-based tool, having more things like that. If there are any, the Spartan man cannons, the jump pads, things like that you can build game modes around and share with your friends and build combat encounters around. If there is that PvE element to Forge, I think would be enormous for the popularity and longevity of it, because one of the biggest things in Fortnite, the battle royale mode's big, but the creative mode, it became bigger because kids could just make fun things to play with their friends, and they would do it for hours and hours and hours. So
it's all my little dude does. Yeah.
That'll be a big emphasis on the equipment system, I think, will be Forge.
Wow, that's actually a great point. That's a great topic, probably for another show, because
with sick idea.
Jesse, there's a reason we invite you.
See, after I stopped talking about it, it popped up in my head. I was like, "Oh shit, Forge mode!" But then everyone started talking about the other stuff, so I was just waiting for my moment.
It only took 12 episodes.
Yeah, good job. Sometime halfway through the year, we'll get another good point from Jesse. I'm just kidding, Jesse. I'm kidding.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
And they even mentioned the fusion coils in this blog too. So per Jesse's point, just like people used to build Forge maps in 3 around the explosive barrels, imagine that times 10 with the grappling hook.
Oh, that was really cool.
I hope that capability extends beyond just fusion coils and barrels. Because if it's a one-trick pony in that respect, then
you mean like
it's going to be
I think there's going to be a lot more.
You might as well just have a bunch of red barrels everywhere.
I imagine you can probably grab something like the skull.
I'm surprised they didn't have it
like an oddball.
Like an oddball, exactly. Yeah.
I'd imagine you can grab anything. If it's a fully physics-based object in a physics-based world,
Even weapons.
that you probably can. Yeah, anything that's on the ground, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to. Even if you don't immediately equip the weapon, you just pull it to yourself to then be able to choose if you want to equip it.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, I was surprised they didn't have something like grabbing a weapon or something like that, and it could also just been unpolished at that time.
I mean, yeah, the way that demo was, it was pretty obvious. It was just a very scripted, go here, do this, go here, do that playthrough like they are. It wasn't just screw around on a live stream and show off all the various systems in the game type of thing.
Yeah.
You know, again, when you guys were talking about that, we're going to have another episode in the future where we bring on Sick and you know, talk about this Forge stuff. But it goes back to that free to play thing and opening it up and even bringing on all these kids. Don't underestimate them actually having a positive impact on Halo, because I tell you what, my little guy, he's like 12 and he doesn't really like to get shot at, so he doesn't really play Fortnite.
Good for him.
He doesn't play the traditional mode, but he does love the creative mode, and that's how he bonds with his friends that like to play the base mode in Fortnite. He just gets on there, just like he does with his Minecraft. He just builds things, and so I just you know, and we'll have to do another episode on that. But that was a really cool thing that you brought up, and I think it does tie into that whole free to play being free and even letting this younger audience in there. So something that was just on my mind. It wasn't part of our things today, but I do want to just also read, because Proven had some thoughts on this, and I want to make sure that he typed this out on his phone. So I want to make sure. So pretend for a minute that I'm Proven with a better mic, and I'm going to go ahead and read this. It says regarding
Halo 5 sucks.
He said, you know, regarding the equipment, he said, this is great news. When they say they looked for equipment that isn't disruptive, to me, that eliminates some of the more extreme possible examples of equipment, which is what we were just talking about. Probably won't see an armor lock or a jetpack equivalent that fundamentally changes the game, which is what we were just kind of worried about. Compared to recent Halo titles with more innate abilities, equipment in Infinite creates fewer overall instances of change within the core combat loop. However, we can make those instances much more impactful and fun. We have more room to push the boundaries of our sandbox, allowing new ways for players to express their skill and gain knowledge across various lifestyles. This is why equipment was the clear choice, and it gives us a lot of space to grow and change the meta as the game progresses over the years. And I actually agree on that. I'm going to kind of expound, but so he also said, you know, Halo to me has always been a simple but deep rule set. Equipment is something that can be used to change the combat loop occasionally, but it won't consistently change the combat loop. What the designer is essentially saying here is that Spartan abilities changed combat scenarios too frequently, whereas equipment will change scenarios less often, but will make those scenarios more exciting since they are not as prevalent. It is more exciting to have equipment be involved in 1 out of 10 fights than be involved in 10 out of 10 fights like Spartan abilities were in 4 and 5. Sometimes scarcity is a good thing. And so like what Proven says
No.
I kind of disagree too.
But yeah,
he's saying that the Spartan abilities change the core gameplay loop, which doesn't make any sense because they are the core gameplay loop. So if you don't like that gameplay loop, sure, but everyone always having the same abilities isn't changing anything. It is what the game was.
Well, I mean, I think he's talking about compared to past entries. That's
yeah, and I think you could actually say both of those things are true. Yeah, it changed the combat. It changed the loop, and it is what the game was. But think about it like
changed. It was 4 and 5 were a different combat loop. It wasn't like the combat loop was then changed on the fly by the abilities. The abilities were always there. That was the combat loop. The equipment, you don't know if somebody has a piece of equipment. Then depending on how prevalent it is, it can change what a fight is without equipment. So by definition, it is the opposite of what he said. It is more randomized. It is changing more fights by default because every fight always had Spartan abilities. So they didn't change. They always had that. Now they will change because they will have random drops that you don't know if somebody has a grapple shot or if they got a drop wall or if they can go invisible or anything. So just by the definition, you don't there is more change to the combat loop in a Halo Infinite match than there would have been in 5.
Agreed.
So
Well,
I'll
that's-
say, oh, go ahead, Mike. I wanna hear you.
I'm just thinking that's two different types of change.
Yeah.
You know, you're equating change from previous entries to
Changing the game itself.
the random, you know, a random factor in a match that is going to momentarily change the gameplay flow, which is their goal really when it comes to equipment. It was Bungie's goal when it came to Halo 3's equipment. Whether or not that was a success, I don't know.
So here's what I would say.
his overall point was always that the combat abilities would change in moment to moment fights when it was predictable. And he was always, Austin likes to go on about how Halo 5 wasn't balanced because everyone always had these abilities, whereas everyone always having these abilities is innately more balanced than an equipment system. You might like the equipment system better and have it want to be what they go back to, but it isn't the point that he's constantly trying to make about balance.
So I'm going to just I'm going to try to, since he's not here, I'm just going to go ahead and be.
You'll just be one bad proven.
One bad proven for a minute. We're going to merge. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, kind of reading what he was saying here, because he does touch on the imbalance things they've had in the past, and then again, this kind of pulls us back to what we were talking about earlier too. When you talk about the constant feedback loop, the way they're going to be iterating on it, and anybody who even played Halo 5 over the, I guess 5.5 years now it's been going on, or over 5 years, they've had maps where they've had power weapons that they pulled out, right? That based on the community feedback, it just didn't work, or it was imbalanced. And so I guess I'm with him a little bit more in that. What I do like about this, and to be transparent, I'm not against the Spartan abilities as much as a lot of purists are. I am, Halo CE is still my favorite game of all time, but I did, obviously when you play 2,000 hours or something, you don't hate it. but when I'm kind of like trying to pick that nuanced balance he's talking about, I think it gives the developers a lot of options, and yes, there could be possibilities where some things get entered in that are imbalanced, but then they could always just retcon that. So what's the big deal? Not really. It does give them a lot more options for map design. Like you have some maps where a grapple hook can do some really cool things, give you some neat advantages. And then when I think about it, I just think about, armor the same way I think about power weapons. It's like, and I guess like this would be an extreme, but you could almost equate everybody starting armor lock with everybody starting with a rocket launcher. And it wasn't that imbalanced, but it was like everybody just started with that power ability. Whereas this is now saying, hey, you got to go charge the map to go get the thing. Halo's always been about map control and, everybody running to that thing that tries to give them the advantage at the beginning of the match. And so I do think as long as it's going to continue to iterate like it will, I do think there's a lot of exciting options that could come with this. And again, if certain things don't work, so they just retcon it. It's like no big deal. They just pull it out.
I think
so. Go ahead.
Yes, right. I think where I disagree with Proven is his last line, because I personally think if 343 makes Halo Infinite in a way that only 1 out of 10 fights involve equipment, then that's a massive failure. In my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, you're probably, and that's not going to happen either. That
for sure it's not. But the problem was for Halo 3, at least in my memory when I played it, equipment was kind of like this secondary thing that, if I had it, yeah, sure, maybe I'd use it, maybe I wouldn't. It, other than a couple like this friggin' green thing and the blue thing, they weren't. I don't know their names, man. I never bothered learning their names.
Wait, are we talking about Halo 3 still?
Halo 3, yeah.
The shield recharge?
The shield recharge, the health, and then the shield discharge, whatever the heck those called. I hated that thing so much.
Active charge.
Yeah. It was like an EMP kind of.
Yeah, an EMP. I hated that. Oh, man. I hate the Halo podcast. So I feel like what I'm excited about equipment, though, is that this is 343's first real shot at it, I think, right? We didn't have equipment in 4 or 5.
Right. Correct.
So I'm a little excited there to see how what their take on it is.
Yeah.
I can't say I'm optimistic. Well, not optimistic. How do I say it? I can't say this is what I wanted if I had to choose, but I'm still really curious to see how it turns out.
Yeah, I understand like the trepidation, but I always look at context. So like when you take something in a vacuum, it can sound you think about it compared to like the worst case scenario of that attribute and something before it, but when I like think about when you put it in the context of what they said about Lone Wolf, about updating the game, obviously the balance has still got to be there. You still have to be able to be competitive with your base, whatever that is, and still be able to not be completely overpowered, or not have a chance. It's not only about grabbing stuff on the map.
Oh, and I remember the name of the Halo 3. It was a power drain was the name of it.
Power drain. Hate that thing.
That is an incredibly unoriginal name.
You got to work on that, but I think it's going to be exciting to see what they do. But I understand. I understand both. I think everybody else here is got more trepidation about it, but I think there's potential. I do think it allows maybe them to try to straddle this line between classic Halo players and Halo 5 players that kind of want they want different things, right? So this is now we're just going to try to. Sometimes that middle road makes nobody happy. So I guess we'll see.
I think there's definitely going to be modes that don't have any equipment in them.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think you may end up seeing, like whatever the competitive modes, right? Whatever
Rank
the pro
play.
Yeah, you could end up seeing some of those modes that take all that stuff out of there. And again, this goes back to what we talked about earlier. The player base is going to be so big that, or hopefully, right? Like hopefully they get to keep people, they get them to stick, that you have enough people that you can create you can have modes where, people can get in creative mode and take some of these equipment options and these physics options and just make some weird and creative things. And then you can have a more base Halo and you should have the player base to support both. At least that's what I would hope. So I'm speaking out of hope right now because I haven't been given any information to not, because they seem to be saying the right things elsewhere. So all right, that's all I had to say on that one. So Mike, Daniel, Jesse, anybody had any other thoughts?
Yes, I will reiterate that having a bunch of abilities by default is innately more balanced than randomly having or not having abilities. That's my only point. So
it's balanced. Yeah, I would agree with you there, though, Jesse.
It's more the old proven chestnut of it's not balanced. Everyone having these abilities because people are always dashing behind corners on him. Since he's not here to defend himself, I can just go, haha, it is innately more balanced if everyone has the same stuff.
It can be more balanced, but somebody can not like it.
Yeah, it's a personal preference on if you like that gameplay or not. I just like the semantics of going after the words he uses.
He just likes semantics. So we'll have to start a podcast for that. All right, so we're going to move on. We got just, I know, a few minutes here, and Mike's going to have to take off. So I want to just cover a couple more topics. We did have the vehicles. They did talk a little bit about that. And one of the things he said was, like, to meet the fantasy of a more expansive Halo, we really needed to unlock our environment artists and level designers to make much more complex terrain. Early on, I made the promise to these teams that if they made awesome looking environments, we'd make the vehicles to be able to traverse them. We have dev builds of older Halos going back to CE, and this terrain is orders of magnitude more difficult, while this caused a significant retuning of core vehicles that have been in every Halo. When you see the gorgeous environments in Infinite, I think it's worth it. I think single-player vehicles are important for encounter design, but multiplayer vehicles are necessary for Halo's community. So just two different things there. And so basically what he's saying is that the vehicles were tuned to the environments rather than the environments tuned towards the vehicles, which is probably different than 343's other philosophies in the past, and maybe even Bungie's. So, Saul, I know you're a vehicle fan. What's your kind of thoughts when you heard that?
I mean, it's pretty exciting. I feel like in general, in video games, especially in open area video games, traversal is a huge part of it. You know what I mean? In fact, you have some great games with some really crappy traversal where you're like, yeah, this doesn't feel good. And it looks like they understand this. And the changes right here that kind of excite me is when he says cause a significant retuning of the core vehicles. Because one of my issues with the Halo vehicles is I never felt they went fast enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
And I have a feeling what this means is that because the map is so much larger, you'll have certain vehicles be much speedier. Maybe the Banshees are quicker, or Mongooses, or whatnot. I don't know. That's kind of exciting to me. And the driving looked so much better. That's one point I think in the demo everyone can agree with. That driving looks great, at least compared to
wasn't
previous.
it Turn 10 helping them with it?
That's what we've heard, right? Yeah.
Real nice.
I was about to say that. It looked like it had Forza physics, or at least like Forza Horizon physics, you know, a little bit in there.
My favorite Warthog ever to drive is the Warthog in Forza Horizon 4.
Yes.
It is fun. It is definitely fun. It's slow. I don't like how slow it is, but it is definitely fun to
Also,
drive.
did you notice in the picture, the concept art that they released with this blog post, what looked like Banshees in the picture, when you zoom in, are actually, they look more Promethean. At least that's what it feels like.
That's the thing. The Banished were on the Ark for a long time, and a lot of their technology, a big part of their story was getting a bunch of Forerunner tech and using that. And so I think that's why you're going to see more of a marriage between Covenant and Forerunner.
It's also colored yellow, which, as we've discussed before, is the Forerunners usually at their association. So maybe this is more proof that, yes, we do still have Prometheans in the game.
Oh, we know we do. We saw one of the targets in the gameplay demo was called, Knight Marshal something or other.
Fair.
There's
But either way,
Prometheans.
I'm pretty excited with the vehicles. I feel like they're going to try doing some new things that Halo hasn't done in a while.
Yeah, I agree. I was stoked when Turn 10 was involved because the physics and driving model, I think, on the new on the gameplay from July looked fantastic. And having if we get that kind of level on of love on every game or every vehicle, imagine a Scorpion that actually has those traction. I think it's going to be great.
No, really good points. One of the things that came to my mind, when they're talking about tuning these vehicles and environments, I think that's just going to give them a lot more dynamic, attributes in the game. Just talked about the Forza Horizon and things like that, but making it more fun to kind of use in all these different terrains. Unlike going the other direction, and like I'm going back now thinking about Halo 5 and Spark moves, but how they make the environments try to fit the abilities and things like that. Sometimes you end up shoehorning things in that don't really feel good. I think going the other direction, even with vehicles, could be interesting. Mike, did you have any thoughts on it?
Honestly, it's kind of weird that you say that, because that's my only real concern regarding mapping the vehicles to the environments, because like Halo 5 had the illusion of choice. You can bust through this vent, or you can do a ground pound from this area, but it was kind of very transparent designs meant to cater to the Spartan abilities.
Yep.
I'm kind of concerned about where they're gonna insert, let's say, a Banshee, but it doesn't really make sense. It's gonna be very apparent that the Banshee is here because there's a canyon or something, instead of giving us the ability to, I don't know,
They're
get across
definitely gonna limit it for sure.
Yeah. So I mean that's a minor concern, but other than that, it's as long as the only other thing that I would say, as long as traversing on ground is always a viable option, because what happens if your Warthog gets blown up?
Oh yeah.
You don't want the game worlds to be so. I mean, I want them to be vast. Don't get me wrong, but I want the traversal to still be rewarding enough that if my Banshee or my Warthog gets blown up, I don't want to feel like I'm walking for 20 minutes before something happens.
I do wonder if there's going to be some sort of
too.
call-in system where you can call in as you progress and you start getting more UNSC people. Can you call in a Warthog or a Scorpion or something on a cooldown type of deal? Can you do? balanced so that it's not something you just rely upon all the time. But if you get in a rough spot in an area where the game knows you're going to be driving for a minute versus running for 10, that they have a system in place to get you another car.
I want it to be like Metal Gear Solid 5 where they just drop it down out of the
I mean, but I thought about something like that, and I'm hoping that it's something more specific to the area instead of a cooldown that you have on your persons. Just because I think it would be harder to really polish encounter design if you have a cooldown to call in a banshee or a warthog or a scorpion.
Yeah.
So
yeah, either way, yeah, you're right. I mean, it does create some interesting balancing challenges that could go either way. But at the same time, I mean, it does sound like it frees up the artist to kind of make the environments look interesting. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, they play interesting. And yeah, obviously, we've talked about it before, but how Halo plays is exponentially more important, at least to me, than how it looks. So, but as long as they, so far it looked good what we saw. And oh, go ahead. What were you saying?
I gotta go. But it was great talking to you guys.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for sticking around. Almost made it to the end.
Yeah, almost. But have fun, guys.
Enjoy your shift at the Avondales.
Take it easy, Mike.
Thanks.
All right, cool. All right, guys. So yeah, that's anybody have any other thoughts on vehicles?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in terms of the terrain, I almost read that more as, they're going to make more, environmental pivot points, kind of like how, in certain maps you've got points where you can do a dash jump and you get to a different location or a different area that kind of gives you an advantage. Like I imagined it more that they were kind of building terrain around vehicles for that aspect. Like maybe they'll be able to launch you into a specific area, or it'll be a great apex point for a 180 turn to get the flag back the other direction or something like that, more so than a limiting factor, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, as long as it balances, and it goes back to like everything else they just kept talking about in this whole sandbox thing, as long as these because I guess this is the one section where like the focus seemed to be on not as much on the balance. So I guess that's where a lot of maybe concern can come up. But as long as it balances with everything else and it adds to the sandbox in the design, they did say there's going to be some other vehicles they haven't revealed yet. So it will be
like a
interesting
boat.
to see. Yeah, I mean that'd be cool. But one thing I don't like in games is sometimes when they just pigeon you, like they pigeon in this section to force you to use this vehicle, and it just doesn't feel very dynamic or organic. It's just like
absolutely.
Like when they give you the rocket launcher when you need the rocket launcher, and then they give you the certain vehicle when you need that certain vehicle. It's like that's the one thing. Again, I think Bungie's early Halos mostly avoided. They had those in a couple spots, but for the most part, they avoided those. So, obviously Halo Reach in that flying section, I don't want to ever see anything like that again. I don't know how many of you guys like that. The spaceship battle, that was awful.
Oh yeah,
it went on a little too long, but I thought that it was a cool, novel concept, I guess.
Nice concept. So yeah, hopefully we don't have concepts with like poor execution from.
Yeah, New Alexandria was a much better way to do. You were kind of pigeonholed in that you had to use the Falcon, but it was still part. I mean, the problem with the space level was that it was never done in any of the other Halos, so you had to completely learn everything on the fly.
Yeah.
Because I think that was the first time you used a saber, right?
Yeah.
If I remember right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. All right, cool. All right, so I'm going to move on. We got a couple more things. I know we're an hour and a half, but wait, was somebody about to say anything before some thoughts?
Nope, I'm good.
All right, cool. All right, so real quickly, damage types. I didn't have a lot on this, but he did mention something like instead of using a weapon that you like because of how it shoots or handles in Halo Infinite, you might want to grab a certain weapon because of how it affects other players, environments, or vehicles. To me, that just sounds like Halo. It doesn't sound like anything. It doesn't sound like any breaking change to Halo. Jesse, any thoughts from you on that? Are you
About
eating
what?
fajitas?
Yeah, I was
Damage types.
I got my headset set to wireless, and it just completely freaking broke up. So I missed everything you said.
That's all good.
got
I
wire back.
I was on the damage types thing, so I was saying like basically,
Yes. Okay.
yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
So the way they had talked about it, because there's always been plasma takes your shields out, kinetic is it's kinetic. The way they talked about it, the marriage of the Forerunner tech and the way the Banished are, and they said like I gotta find it. They said like there's also things to come. Let me look for it real quick.
While he's looking, Jesse or Sol, anybody have any thoughts on it?
The damage type, I mean, I guess one thing, you're right. I mean, it's always been Halo, right? You see a vehicle pulling up, you take out your plasma pistol and you take it down with that. I am kind of excited though that they'll take it to another level. Like for example, Forerunner weapons, for the most part, they're not unique enough in the sense that like I need to use a Forerunner weapon for X encounter,
And I found it. It was in addition to further clarity and purpose to the legacy damage types, i.e. kinetic and plasma, the team has also been pursuing new surprises for players that we are eager to talk about in the months ahead. As in, it definitely sounds like there's going to be new stuff, not just plasma, not just kinetic, and not just like Forerunner wasn't really either. I think Forerunner Banished there's going to be more stuff, and it's really exciting to think about.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I wonder if that's where the physics kind of enter, like you were just saying. And
or like even they talked about the Ravager, and they've changed it since the July demo, where it's more like an area of effect denial type thing. So having different types of weapons and different types of damage types to facilitate more for that sandbox, both in single player and in multiplayer. Like in single player, say you're in a building, you got a Ravager, you've got something that can put some new type of damage on the ground or in the air, or in multiplayer, like you're trying to keep someone away from a point. It's there's a lot of options there if they've got one or two or three new types of things.
No, really good point. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, imagining incorporating physics in there in terms of, what if some of the weapons alter your movement speed, or you have something that has pushback that's not just the grav hammer, something that actually alters the opposite player's ability to kind of counter. I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about in terms of what they're going to be showing in the months ahead, but I mean, there's definitely a lot of possibilities beyond just your plasma, your kinetic, and then the Promethean weapons that were just kind of this.
We saw one, the lightning
one?
grenade.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So like having a lightning type of area of denial, or hitting multiple people at once, that type of stuff. They showed that in the right. Gameplay trailer. I completely forgot about it.
I did too.
Actually, yeah.
Can you guys think of things that are maybe in other games from a?
You mean like damage types?
You just look at Destiny. Yeah, so much of it's going to be like, oh, maybe this weapon hits, and it's something like Destiny where it puts a dot on something like a poison.
I was going to say the same.
You hit a lot of the RPG pillars, like frost damage, electrical damage, fire damage, like all these different things.
They could bring back like
do
Halo CE's plasma and slowing you, which annoyed the crap out of me. Oh my god, still does.
Or like an offensive armor lock where the weapon actually freezes your motor functions.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe a thing that forces you to swap weapons.
Yeah.
Anything that takes control out of your hands always sucks. May in Overwatch can go to hell.
Yeah, seriously.
Or stasis in Destiny. Thank you very much.
Oh my god,
yeah,
horrible.
That is a thing when you. Anything that takes control away from the other player can just be unbelievably overpowered.
Yeah, right. There would have to be some sort of way to counter if that's something they were looking at, because that's the frustrating thing about all those games we mentioned, is that there's no way to counter it.
Maybe a gun that like overheats your opponent's weapons. Stuff like that. There's a lot of things they can do.
That's
or something.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Daniel. When you talk about everything needs to have a counteraction, right? Like there needs to be a weakness or a situation where it's vulnerable or not the best thing. So, um, but when you start talking about the limiting player movement and things like that, I can see that being that really messing up the dance. So hopefully
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
that's not one of those options. But
Yeah.
And if
either
you
way,
do have something that's like a poison cloud or
right,
a big area move, something like the grapple shot would be the counter.
right.
Depending on how often you get them, depending on how many charges you get, maybe the gun doesn't have a ton of ammo because grapple shots don't have a ton of charges, that type of balancing.
Yeah. All right, cool. So, any other thoughts on that? I mean, basically, I just think it's one more thing to kind of layer on the sandbox that will be evolving and used over time. So it sounds good. It sounds good that they're going in that direction. And again, the reason why I don't really have as much fear of things is because they can always retcon anything that doesn't really work. So, this game is going to keep on going.
Yeah.
Um, any final thoughts on that? And if not, then I'm just going to go like just to this very, very last section, and then we'll kind of wrap up.
I feel like even just grabbing and throwing things would add a fair bit of variety in the
Yeah,
damage types and how you fight.
yeah. I'm hoping physics. Just the possibility of
Yeah.
physics in Halo. Yeah, and especially you just think about like just dynamic stuff. Like it doesn't always need to be super predictable. And yeah, it's kind of seeing some of the crazy things that could happen there. So hopefully physics based things are something that's not just a once in a long
Yeah.
while.
Yeah. Do you guys remember Half-Life 2 Deathmatch? I mean, it wasn't a great game in terms of a standalone PvP, but just the sheer fun that you could have with the gravity gun, and attaching that to everything in the environment. And I think the grappling hook can potentially open up some really cool doors.
Well, if they throw physics into Forge and then you start throwing some of these other things in there again, just kind of thinking what the community might come up with, like just a grapple hook, physics, whatever, just make it a mess.
Yep.
So they don't need to be balanced there; they just need to be fun. So, all right, I want to move on to the last thing. So he did talk. So really, a lot of the things we've been talking about today have been largely tied into the multiplayer. But obviously all these things do blend into the campaign as well. And they did spend some time talking about, how these teams are working with both the multiplayer and the campaign. There might be some slight differences in how things work, in terms of a balancing standpoint, but that these things are obviously going to affect both. And that's one of the nice things. That's always been one of the cool things about Halo's when it's had a diverse sandbox. It really impacted both of those aspects of the game. So they concluded with this last little section. He just kind of read off the situation fighting hunters. So I'm going to read it, just see if anybody has any kind of thoughts on this. And he goes, it's called Dances with Hunters. He goes, yes, the combat dance, the beating heart of every Halo game. For grizzled Spartan veterans, this should be a familiar scene. Imagine a Forerunner interior, a timeless metallic vault of soaring ceilings. It's quiet, empty, except for a pair of hunters, shields up, shoulder spikes twitching, blocking your path forward. What to do? Well, that's easy, I said to myself the first time I fought the hunters in Halo Infinite. Bait them, get them to charge, then step aside, pivot, and direct as much firepower into their exposed wormy backsides as you can before they turn and turtle. But when I tried these classic dance steps, the hunters had something else in mind. As expected, one of the hunters charged, exposing its weak spot. But by the time I pivoted to face it, it had already pivoted to face me. That's odd, I thought. It must be a bug. I tried to dance steps again, same results, except this time the second hunter filled my face with a fuel rod projectile, setting me scrambling for cover. Crouched behind a Forerunner pillar, shields fried and health deep in red, I had a quick think, what's different? Hunters turn faster. Okay, I assume this isn't a bug. What's the game trying to tell me? And what's the new dance moves have I got? As another volley of enemy fire rattled my virtual head inside my virtual helmet, I remembered I have equipment. Specifically, in the case of more reactive hunters, I have a grapple shot. Which means I'm faster and more mobile too. I don't want to spoil your own fun of experimentation with a detailed description of what happened next, but suffice it to say, the grapple shot didn't cheese my encounter with the hunters. It deepened it. Simultaneously made me feel more powerful and the hunters more intelligent. We all knew the rules had changed, but the hunters weren't going to let me dance on their graves without a fight. This is just one example from a single encounter, but for me, it encapsulates what's so exciting about the totality of the work that Quinn, Tim, David, Brian, Elon, Kevin, and the entire Sandbox team have done to deepen and expand the Halo combat toolkit. It's great to feel the respect for the legacy. It's even better to experience how they improved upon it. Jesse, I'm going to start with you because I know you are, like a big campaign guy, and I wanted to just is there anything that kind of came to your mind as you were like hearing him talk about that?
Just having better movement, having more options is something that a lot of modern FPSs like Titanfall 2, Doom, Eternal, and whatnot have all offered. That personally, I think, moved them ahead campaign-wise. And Halo 5 had kind of, but not to the point that I think was enough to keep up. And this is exactly what I wanted. I wanted a big world of more open, especially than 4, way more open than 4, a little more open than 5. These big ass play spaces where I've got this awesome tool set to mess around with some smart AI. And what he described is everything I had been hoping for personally.
Nice. No, I think you kind of echo a lot of the same sentiments I had, although I don't think those other games passed it. But anyways, so what is your thoughts, man?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty exciting. First, it's great to see that hunters will continue to be like a full-on, like almost boss encounter. That's something I feel 343 really nailed, especially in Halo 5. Hunters show up and you're like, whoa, okay, these guys are tough. I am kind of curious because when we saw the grapple shot being used in the Infinite demo, you couldn't shoot with it, right? Technically, I don't think you could.
No, you couldn't.
So I'm kind of curious if this current story means that he was able to grapple in the air and shoot it from the back, from the sky, or if it means something else. But at the same time, it's exciting in two ways. One is, as Jesse said, mobility is big, and two, it feels like they can up the AI. Right, because you can't make an enemy AI too unfair if you don't have the means to counter it. But if you have the means to counter it, you can go as all as you want. And I'm pretty excited for that.
Yeah. No, more good points. Daniel, how about you, man? What would you think?
Yeah, I was just gonna say pretty much the same thing. It's like, when you look back and people talk about the AI of the older games, it's still relatively restricted based around the person's movement. So if you can have those extremely intelligent enemies who have a wider move set, who have different reactions, because you have more tools in more ways than just simply sidestepping or side dashing, and you have the grappling hook, you have a grav lift or whatever other equipment they have in there, I think it has the potential to make the campaign sandbox especially a little bit more kind of freeform and a little bit more kind of what we talk about when we look at games like Titanfall 2 or Doom Eternal, where Doom Eternal especially, where they've got these arenas and you've got the swing poles, you've got the grav lifts, you've got the portals, and so they're all designed to make you kind of change your playstyle and adapt, but also you have the freedom to do any of those things in any order you want. And having the AI in Halo kind of up their game because of those elements, I think is a recipe for success.
Yeah, and all those are good points, and I think a lot of them really kind of tie into the first thing that came to my head, because the first time I ever saw the Halo 5 Spartan abilities, one of the things that jumped in my head is, man, look at all these possibilities that could come up in the campaign. And then, unfortunately, when I played the game, that was one of the areas that it really, I thought, hurt. And the reason is because they gave you all this stuff, and they gave you maybe excuses to use them, but they really didn't balance your enemies and weapons and things, and kind of put those all together in a way that really offset those the right way. So like when I was listening to the story, that was one of the things that really jumped out at me, because like, yeah, you guys make good points about Titanfall and Doom. And I think the reason why their movements work in those, and maybe they didn't work in Halo in terms of the campaign, was because of the fact that it's thorough. Those things are thoroughly ingrained in like just the foundation of the game, and whereas like on Halo 5 it was just sort of like this thing they added, and in some way, yeah, it was supplemental, and then like to me it kind of broke the dance, and the reason is because so like I was so much faster than, or I could like sprint and slide behind something, and it just gave me the enemies really didn't have anything to counter that, right? Like they weren't really tweaked or balanced to sort of offset that, and not in any interesting way, at least not for me. So like when I played through that, it just felt like it was just tacked on, like, okay, yeah, use this here, you can I'm going to give you this ledge, you can jump off and land on their heads or whatever. But it wasn't really implemented in like some interesting like dance or sandbox type thing, where here it's saying that, hey, yeah, we've added these things, we've given you new things to use, but the thing that stuck out is like they're talking about the hunters have been tweaked to adjust to that, right? So now you can't cheese them with things, and he specifically said that. So it gives you some more options, but it doesn't. Hopefully, they're able to continue this and execute on what they're talking about. But at least the focus is on making this something that's just going to widen the sort of options you have, but without necessarily, breaking again the dance part of it. But so yeah, I was kind of excited to hear that, because it tells you, hey, there's going to be new AI, which is something we heard in the past, and number two, it's like they're going to balance out things that they put in this so that they're going to consider how it affects everything else. It's not going to just be tacked on like it's an RPG and you got this thing that's overpowering. Now everything else is kind of going to work along with it. So that's me in a nutshell. Any final thoughts on that? No,
I think I'm pretty good.
All right, cool. All right, guys. Well, we got through a lot of stuff this week, like we said, but we still have not finished our prediction show.
Yeah, and no questions either for this episode. Still went to almost 2 hours.
Yeah, so obviously we wouldn't have even had time for those. I mean, didn't catch it came through, but so hopefully we'll get to some of that next week. I think probably will be a slower. I guess you never know what's going to break these days. But as of now, it looks like the next time there's going to be a big update will be our show 2 shows from now. So next show, hopefully we'll be able to delve a little bit into some of the finish up our predictions and get to some community thoughts on this and kind of feed off that a little bit. So I'm going to let you go ahead and close the show out.
Yeah. So one, I guess, big change from the last time this episode had was if you guys are ever interested in our Patreon, but notice the amount was a little too much, because it is. I mean, we get that. We added a new tier, just a small little tip tier. So if you wanted to support us but couldn't really put in a lot, this is a good opportunity for that. Otherwise, please comment, like the video, let us know if you have any issues, any questions, and yeah, thank you for watching.
All right, man. Hey, appreciate it. So, all right, everybody, if you stay this long, we really appreciate you. Yeah. And we'll see you in about 2 weeks. Thanks.
Yeah. Ahoy, hoy.
See you guys then.
Take care.
All right. Bye.